All right, everybody. Mr. Monaco back. Some more exciting Global 2 review for your Regents exam coming up in June. And in this video, we're going to go through units 4, 5, and 6. And it is meaty, very chunky. Ooh. Anyways, we're going to start with this idea of imperialism. And as a reminder, as I go through each unit, at the end of each unit, I'll have index cards for you to copy or take screenshots of so that you can study after the videos. And as a gentle reminder, if you really don't feel like listening to my voice, you could just skip ahead to the index cards. Just do something. Do something. Be better. All right. Imperialism. We know that after the Industrial Revolution, countries like England really needed to gain more resources and needed different markets in order to keep their economy growing. So they went overseas, they went near other land masses, and they decided to take natural resources from other countries who were not as technologically developed as them. The map here that I'm speaking over shows this perfectly. We see in 1822 all of the European countries and the little bits of land they claimed around the world. But when we move over to 1914 on the right, we see that that has spread all around the world, most notably in Africa, with the Berlin Conference, which European leaders came together to decide how to divide up Africa for their resources without ever inviting them. It does lead us to these images that get used often on Regents exams. And they can be difficult to understand if you're not super familiar with the story. So first, let's make the story simple. Africa had a lot of resources, but were not as modern as Europeans because Europeans had been through the Industrial Revolution with factories, coal, and iron, and modernizing. When Europeans learned of all the resources in Africa, they decided to split up Africa amongst the European countries and take their resources for industrialization. Now, the first cartoon is called the Rhodes Colossus, and if you couldn't tell, he's actually standing over the continent of Africa, showing a type of domination and how they wanted to control Africa from top to bottom. The middle cartoon has the word Afrique, which we want you to know just means Africa, and everyone around the table is meant to represent a different European country, and they are slicing it up so that everybody gets a piece of it. It's just meant to symbolize all of the resources that Africa has, which were being taken by Europeans. And then the last one shows Africa in a color map, and you can see all of the different resources in the key that were being taken. Again, when we have maps or cartoons, we want to focus in on the keys, the words that are being used, and not like the names of countries or the names of water, but use the names and words of what's trying to be described. On top of Africa, India was also a popular place for imperialism, especially Great Britain, because Great Britain was able to take so much of their resources. It was called the crown jewel. No, wait, the jewel in the crown? What am I trying to say, Gregoire?
Brightest jewel.
The brightest jewel in the crown for England because they made them so much money and offered so many resources. You'll see in the title of the map that it's called Railroads Built During British Rule. And then the key is actually titled Railroads. So we see how they changed the entire landscape of India. And you'll be able to make arguments for both good and bad. It was great that India now had railroads and were becoming more modern, but it was also bad because it wasn't being used for their people. It was being used to transport goods and British soldiers. The other cartoon is the ABCs of colonialism, and because of that word, you did have to know what it meant. And colonialism can be another word for imperialism on the Regents exam, and it just explains why Great Britain was able to take over other countries and why they deserve to do it and why people in England should be proud of that. I wanted to bring up this document specifically because it's going to happen. On the exam, you're going to get a document that looks huge. You're going to get a document that looks like It's very unmanageable, and you're going to get a document that's only worth a little bit because it might be just one multiple choice question or two multiple choice questions. And I wanted to take you through this. Again, like from our first reviews, we see that there is a small body paragraph up top. There's two large body paragraphs inside the text box, and then a source underneath. And there are strategies you can use in order to understand these better. But the first thing you have to know is that your exam is 3 hours, so you have time to read this. You don't have to skim. Slow down and read. After you've done that, think about the words that you did understand. Inside this document are words like industrial. There's lists with commas at the bottom of the first paragraph that explain what was happening in India. There are key vocabulary words like raw materials and markets that also get repeated. So we want you to look for words that repeat, look for commas that give us lists, and look for vocabulary words that we've been talking about throughout the entire year. When you do that and you get this idea about what the document is for, it'll become much easier to answer multiple choice questions and write about it. This one shows how the East India Company started out by helping the Indian people, but eventually moved on to taking advantage of them and setting up a government to take advantage of the people themselves. Now, this didn't just happen in Africa and India, it also happened in China. And that cartoon on the right, there, is very similar to the one that we saw of Africa. We see different European countries splitting it up for their resources. In China, it did have a different name. They were called spheres of influence. And the map shows those spheres of influence with Russia, Britain, France, Japan, and Germany. It'll say things like political borders or borders of different countries, but we know that they're using this land for resources, and that is imperialism. The documents you will get on imperialism range between documents that show you why imperialism was good for England and for the people in those countries, mainly for civilization, and it'll also take you through all of the negatives for imperialism. But in this document, you'll be able to go through 2 paragraphs and look at the words that are being repeated, and if it's not the words, then it's the ideas that are being repeated. Okay, and one of those words I see at the very top of the second body paragraph is civilization. I see laws, okay, I see freedoms, and what they do is try to convince you one way or the other of whether imperialism is good or not. So I've given you the quick story of imperialism. Let's take a look now at the index cards. And here's the first one, the causes of imperialism. The causes of imperialism can very basically be said as industrialization. And inside industrialization, there are raw materials that were needed: coal, iron, gold, diamonds, cotton, tobacco. All of these can be used. The next are new markets. Not only did they take over areas for their resources, then after they made these new products, they would sell it back to these people and make a profit. So in China, they would take whatever raw materials they had. In India, they would take cotton, bring it back to the factories, make clothes, and then sell the clothes back to the Indians. A very unfair trade. Some people questioned whether this was fair until they came up with new ideas for taking over other people, like spreading Christianity, letting them know about Jesus and monotheistic religions in areas of the world that hadn't been introduced to that. This is all part of spreading civilization, introducing them to railroads and communications and setting up factories there. But overall, one of the meanest, and also what some people back then would consider the science of imperialism, is this idea of social Darwinism. The most famous phrase from it being survival of the fittest. And what that means is that they believed that the stronger countries were allowed to take over the weaker countries because that's just how nature works, right? A lion will eat a rabbit, and Great Britain will take over India because they are stronger than them. the causes hopefully make sense. And I've mentioned this before, and I'm going to mention it again, and probably a few more times. Don't feel like you need to memorize these, but you should feel like you understand the story. So because they needed raw materials, because Europeans needed new markets, because Europeans believed they deserved to be stronger than everyone, we come to these effects. And after they try to take over these three major areas of the world, Africa will lose its own culture because it's taken over by Europeans. They won't have the same boundaries as before. In India, the British government will set themselves up there because they were taken over by them. And the British government will in some ways help. There'll be railroads, hospitals, and schools, and some forms of modernizing and westernizing. But we also know that the Indians will be taken advantage of, and the people of India will eventually resist. In China, the people will be split up into spheres of influence in the different European countries' territories. And we also know that they suffer a terrible epidemic, the Opium Wars, where a large amount of the Chinese population will become hooked on a drug. But of course, at the end, and I'm going to read the part that my head is blocking, countries will want independence and to remove foreign influences. The entire episode of imperialism and the gaining of independence can be classified as something like being racist or racism, but what we want you to think of it as is the desire for power, right, or the impact of industrialization. And when you get into these enduring issues, we want you thinking of all of these documents as desire for or impact of. Imperialism will eventually lead to a major event in world history, World War I. You can see on the left, there's kind of a grainy picture of gentlemen on top of a cauldron that's boiling over called Balkan Troubles. And what it's meant to show is all the tension that was happening in Europe at the time towards this towards the middle of this age of imperialism, where European countries are now arguing over territory and resources and building up their military with their industrialization. So what European countries begin to do is create alliances. And I get that word from the key of the map, showing all the different alliances, all the different friendships that these countries are making. And you'll see that they're split up by types of regions, right? All of Central Europe was called the Central Powers. Well, the Triple Entente, France, Britain, Russia, these were more of like the older, the people who are used to being in power, people with great monarchies or people who are considered to be the most Western and modern. And it's causing a conflict with these new powerful countries that are coming up. We know after World War I, one of the major effects was the creation of the Treaty of Versailles. And here are two documents that you'll have a chance to see on the Regents exam. And I like going through how they structure these documents. For example, the one with words, and it's not split into three paragraphs, it's split into three articles with three different numbers. But what they are the most important ones that we're trying to teach you, along with the title, Articles from the Treaty of Versailles. And just highlighting some of the words that were repeated, that Germany, 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 war, war, war. And then I highlight accepts responsibility, and I'm able to gather that Germany is about to be punished for World War I. And you can see that in the cartoon as the man inside of the hand that has all the names of the winners of World War I is being forced to be peaceful. And we know from our study of history that forcing these countries to be peaceful is only going to lead to more conflict. After World War I, not only was Germany forced to accept blame, but we see other effects. So, for example, in the picture on the left, the United States wants to be in the League of Nations, but they're missing. We want an international peacekeeping organization so that a world war will never happen again. But there's more than just that. If you look at the map, it can be really difficult to read because it shows a lot of bar graphs, and it may look like things are going up or increasing, but look at the title, which is inside of the key. It says the effect of the Depression in Europe. And hopefully you're all very familiar with the Great Depression when there was so much poverty and poorness around the world. But if that kind of got away from you and escaped you, look at the words that repeat themselves inside the key. It says decline in, declining. Things are going down. And what they're describing is industrial production, economic activity. What's going down are goods being made in factories and the amount of money being made. So this map actually shows that after World War I, the Treaty of Versailles punishes Germany. They're trying to make a group of world leaders to stop war, but it's not working. And people aren't making money, and nobody can buy goods from factories. This is all very bad stuff. Here's what I would have you write down on your index cards. And again, you can write them down and then study them later, or if you wanted to, you can take a screenshot on your phone and go through your camera roll. Go ahead. Take a pick. The causes of World War I we broke down into the 4 main causes. Just give you a second to see if you remember that, or you see what we did there. M-A-I-N, Main. The M was militarism. All of the different alliances were building up their militaries from industrialization. The alliances were making people get nervous because people were choosing friends and sides, and it didn't really make sense in the moment. Imperialism and the fight for goods and natural resources to be the most powerful country in the world. And then nationalism, a theme that shows up over and over again in global history. There was so much pride in one's country that it turned into a form of racism or culturalism where other people just automatically chose their side without trying to understand the other. Now, World War I does have an event that's considered the spark. Now, once it happened, we were in the event, and that is the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. And this happened in the Balkan regions of Europe, just like the cartoon we saw. It was called the powder keg because it was ready to explode. Now, after World War I happens, we have these effects. The effects are that Europe had to have their borders redrawn so that the winners could win the most and the losers would be punished. There was an attempt to find a peacekeeping group called the League of Nations. We know the United States did not join. And of course, the worst treaty in all of history, the Treaty of Versailles. In it, you'll see that I put it down in a row. Germany, 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 Germany. The germs will be blamed for the war. They will lose their colonies, making them unable to have enough resources for industrialization. They will pay reparations, meaning that they'll have to pay money for all the damage that they were being blamed for in World War I. And then the demilitarizing of Germany, not allowing them to have an army or navy, or a very minimal amount where they were no longer a threat. So World War I was a disastrous event, but not just for those involved like Germany. It was also actually pretty disastrous for some of the people you might consider winners, like the Russians. Russia will wind up dropping out of World War I, even though they were technically on the winning side. It was just too much for their country to handle. And in these photographs, I want to show you what was happening in Russia during World War I. In that first picture in the top left, you see I highlighted that workers were protesting. Yeah, workers were not getting any rights. They were being treated unfairly, and Russia didn't have enough fuel physically to heat homes or run factories. On top of that, you'll notice that middle picture on the bottom of people standing outside. There were food lines. There was not enough food for the people of Russia during World War I, not even for soldiers, let alone the peasants. Now, on the far left on the bottom, you'll see that I made a triangle out of that cartoon. It's meant to show, again, another rigid social pyramid where wherever you're born is where you were. And we see that the Tsar of Russia, next to the clergy, the holy people, were taking advantage of the peasants who were carrying the load for everybody. So what will happen is that after Russia comes out of World War I, this man in the poster, V.I. Lenin, will promise the people of Russia peace, land, and bread. You'll notice the communist symbol in the background, the hammer and sickle for the Communist Party. And he'll use the teachings of Marx to say that the Russian people should overthrow the government and they should be dividing up the resources equally amongst the people so that they can have enough to not only survive but live comfortably. What this political cartoon shows are all the reasons for overthrowing the government. And it can be a really hard document to read, but I just kind of highlighted the words that were the easiest for me to understand. There's secret police, there's censorship, and there's imprisonment. So these people must be bad. But I highlighted a word in the title on the bottom, maintain. And that's what empires do. They maintain power through these ways. So what this cartoon tells me is that it was time for a revolution, and the people of Russia were ready for that. After the revolution happens, Lenin does succeed, and he divides up land, he brings peace from the war, and gives people food, but he's going to die shortly after. And in his place, Joseph Stalin will take over, and these documents from Regents exams show the effects of Joseph Stalin's leadership. The most famous would be the larger one on the right side here, the command economy, the 5-year plan. And you'll notice that on the map, or sorry, not on the map, on the graph, it shows 1932 to 1937, his 5-year plans. And in a way, it works. The industrial levels of Russia rise. Electricity, coal, iron, and steel are all going to increase, making Russia more powerful industrially. But we also have to look at that top left corner, and in his command economy, where a government is informing the people what to do, we see collectivization, and that should be an easy one to remember. And I think it's easy because on a collective farm, you collect all the food together, and then everybody's supposed to have the same amount. But that's not what happened. Joseph Stalin's communist government would collect the food from them and still have this inequality. But he was so strong militarily that the peasants were not able to overthrow him. He would also use terrible tactics, one of the worst human rights violations that we've studied, the Ukrainian Holodomor. The collectivization of farms led to famine. The Russian government would take all of the food from the Ukrainian farmers, and they would forcefully starve them because they would not listen to Joseph Stalin. So we have a famine that did not need to happen. I highlighted some of the words that repeat themselves, like peasants and starved and famine. You could see in the picture people burying friends in their graves, people lying dead on the street. This was considered a human rights violation because it was forced and did not need to happen. What we would put here for this event are the causes of the Russian Revolution. Now, you can see that there are plenty of them, but I'm hoping at this point you're starting to see similarities between this revolution and any revolution. Poor people or peasants are unhappy. They want to overthrow their government for usually the same reasons. And then once a new leader takes over, these stories are still similar. Like, look at the causes of the Russian Revolution. The first one is World War I. There was not peace. There was fighting and death. People were starving, and it's a government's job to feed their people. They were running out of resources, and maybe the most famous reason for any revolution, the abuse of power by whoever is in charge, whether it's a king, a czar, or military leader. And one other one here, workers' rights are starting to become an issue in this age of communism and Karl Marx ideas. Now, the leader of the revolution is V.I. Lenin, and he promises peace, land, and bread for the peasants. And in a way, he does deliver, but he just doesn't live long enough to see it all out. Now, the effects of this are Joseph Stalin taking power. He will turn these communist ideas into a totalitarian dictatorship. Now, both Stalin and Lenin are guilty of eliminating their competition. Joseph Stalin certainly took it to a more famous extreme, like the Ukrainian Holodomor, which again is a forced famine. And in his command economy, he had 5-year plans with heavy industry, but he would also collectivize agriculture, where he would collect all of the food from the farmers and not split it up equally. So take your screenshots, take your notes, and use these notes for after this video. Again, you also, if you forgot, don't have to listen to me. You can fast forward and rewind to the most important parts with these index cards, but we have a couple more things to go through first. Like the interwar period, what happens in between World War I and World War II. And the first is this: Japan is expanding. I know that in that map, and not only did I circle the title, which is expanding, but in the key it says territory added twice. So I know that Japan is getting larger. You could tell from the map in the key that they're getting larger because of imperialism. It doesn't say imperialism, but I know it because it says coal and iron and copper and gold, and I know that those are natural resources that are needed for factories and building a military. Now, on the timeline of Japanese imperialism, it goes over all the different wars that they have and all of the different aggressive maneuvers. The one thing we want you to know with Japan on top of that is the end of their story, which is the atomic bomb. We know that Japan and their story of World War II ends when Nagasaki and Hiroshima, two major cities of Japan, are bombed using the new atomic bomb, the new nuclear age of technology. World War II will also signal a rise in fascism, and this rise in fascism will have certain characteristics that we want you to be on the lookout for. And it's not just Benito Mussolini of Italy, it is most famously Adolf Hitler of Germany, using these characteristics like extreme nationalism and extreme obedience to the state, using force, terror, censorship. These are all of the things that a fascist dictator would do. And I've put two multiple choice questions on here that you can look at where the words repeat themselves: the state, the state, the state. And then I underline one of the lines before it where it says individuals and groups must come within the state. And it matches the answer underneath where the state is more important than the individual. In Germany, of course, the story of Nazi Germany performing the Holocaust is a human rights violation. But you should know that the Holocaust is not an acceptable answer for World War II. It's not a cause. It was happening, but the cause was Hitler's actions, trying to expand his territory and not following the rules of the Treaty of Versailles. We still know that this was happening in Germany and around Germany during World War II and is considered a human rights violation. During this time, though, as Germany is expanding and we are now in World War II, the story of Germany concludes with him stabbing Joseph Stalin in the back, as the cartoon suggests. He will break the Soviet-Nazi pact, which says those two would leave them alone. He makes the exact same mistake that Napoleon makes. He tries to invade Russia during winter. What is eventually going to happen is that Germany will spread itself too thin, and they will be unable to defend themselves on both fronts. One other thing I did want to bring up, that map on the bottom left-hand corner, which can be really confusing to look at, is the event that sparks World War II, and it was from Adolf Hitler in Germany, and it's their invasion of Poland. So in World War I, the event that causes the entire thing to start was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. In World War II, the event that sparks everything that begins it is the invasion of Poland. So here are the documents that you may see, and it eventually concludes with this right here, the D-Day invasion of Normandy Beach. And what we see is that it's a major invasion of the Allies trying to take land back from Adolf Hitler, forcing him to fight on two fronts and eventually losing the war. So what should you have taken from all of that? Well, here's what we should start with: the causes of World War II. The causes of World War I were main. The causes of World War II are hate, H-A-T-E. The H is Adolf Hitler and his actions trying to expand Germany's territory and ignoring the Treaty of Versailles. The second is a vocabulary word, appeasement, which was giving in to Hitler's demand until European countries like France and Britain couldn't take it anymore. You'll see the Treaty of Versailles is on there, and of course, economic problems. We saw that World War I did lead to the Great Depression. The very beginning of the war is the spark, Hitler's invasion of Poland. And World War II continues in the end. Hitler will end the Nazi-Soviet pact. We see political cartoons about this all the time, and his invasion of Russia during winter. The D-Day invasion will force Germany to fight a two-front war, and the effects of World War II. We see this creation of a United Nations where they want to hold leaders responsible for human rights violations, events like the Holocaust, the rape of Nanking in China, and the world is now starting to get a sense that if they want to prevent this from happening, there's more of a need for camaraderie and making sure people who commit these war crimes are held accountable. After World War II, we go directly into the Cold War era, where it's communism versus democracy. And we see this Cold War between communism and democracy best shown between Western Europe and Russia, or what's now called the Soviet Union. And you'll see that thick black line that goes right down the middle of Europe. It's the Iron Curtain. And it is imaginary, but it comes from a famous speech from the man in that cartoon, Winston Churchill. And there is a difference between the Iron Curtain and Berlin Wall. The wall is real, but there is no such thing as an Iron Curtain. And we see that Russia or the Soviet Union will start to blockade itself from the rest of the world. And there's going to become a tension between them and Western ideas. Inside of Berlin, we see that Germany gets split up between democratic countries like France, Britain, and America, and the Soviet communist countries, most famously Russia. So when Germany is split up after World War II, there is this tension still inside of it, just not with Germans, it's with communist and democratic countries. It's going to cause a lot of tension around the world, and people are going to have to choose sides between being communist or being capitalist. And you can choose one of those two sides, or you can choose what India did. They chose peace, as you can see highlighted here in this document, most famously called non-alignment. They're not going to choose a side, and what they found was by not choosing a side, they could get benefits from both capitalists and communists. Of course, there were negative effects to the Cold War. The idea of creating nuclear weapons is now becoming a world threat, and we see on the graph that the United States and Russia will lead all countries in this endeavor and spike the amount of nuclear weapons they have, causing more tension, especially in the conflicts that are highlighted in the second map in Cuba, Afghanistan, Korea, and Vietnam. And I want to take you through the Korea and Vietnam maps, because what's going to wind up happening is that countries, especially in Southeast Asia it seemed, were creating this threat to democratic ways of life. Now, in the first one with the war in Korea, it's going to end in a tie almost, where North Korea will stay communist and South Korea will stay democratic. But in Vietnam, the end of the story is that communists win, and Vietnam will be unified under communism. This leads to increased tension between the United States and Soviet Union as they're building up their military weapons, they're building up nuclear weapons, and it seems as though communism is spreading around the world. Eventually, though, we come to this period of détente, and that's what this Odd Couple cartoon is about. The friendship now, so that people can be less afraid of dying by a nuclear holocaust or nuclear winter, in their lifetime. So the United States and Soviet Union begin to try and get together and kind of ease the tension. And the Soviet Union will even try and take in certain capitalist ideas. Unfortunately, though, because of all the industrialization and overspending where they couldn't keep up with democratic countries who used market economies and supply and demand and capitalism, the Soviet Union is going to fall apart as more and more of their people ask for more rights and more freedoms. What this will all lead to eventually is the end of the Cold War after the Berlin Wall is taken down. But here's what you could write down on your note cards. First, the Cold War sort of begins right after World War II with Winston Churchill's Iron Curtain speech. It's meant to be a symbol for the Western capitalist world and the Eastern communist world. Western Europe will be democratic countries, and they have their own alliance group, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. Eastern Europe will be split into communist countries or Soviet blockades or satellite states, and they are in the Warsaw Pact. The Berlin Wall will split democratic and communist ideas in Germany in the city of Berlin. Other ideas are this idea of non-alignment. While other countries were choosing whether to be communist or democratic, countries like India will famously choose to be non-aligned so that they can receive benefits from both sides. The famous conflicts for the spread of communism come in Vietnam, Korea, and Afghanistan, until eventually we come to this period of détente, where they want to ease their tensions. The Soviet Union will attempt to put in a little bit of capitalism during this period of détente. The ideas are called glasnost and perestroika. If you see it in a document, my guess is that you'll see that they're trying to be more democratic, they're trying to be more capitalist and allowing for these types of freedoms until the fall of the Berlin Wall, which is cut off on the bottom. And when it ends, the Berlin Wall comes down and we see the collapse of the Soviet Union. That, my friends, is units 4 through 6. Again, take your notes of the index cards, take your screenshots of the index cards, take the time to study with friends, by yourself, any way you can. I couldn't suggest it more. Of course, you have myself, Mr. Gregoire, any other history teacher who's around the building, Mr. Shawl, tall, skinny kid. He's my cousin. I changed his diaper. It's true. It's true. I have fans. It's no big deal. Anyways, study up. Ask us for help if you need it. And good luck again. We have one more video after this, the final units of Global 2. Okay, bye.